David Williams stood in the airport terminal, staring at his boarding pass with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Seat 2A, first class. After 34 years on this planet, he was finally going to experience what it felt like to sit in those big leather seats he'd walked past hundreds of times on his way to the cramped economy section. His hands were slightly shaky as he held the ticket, not from nerves about flying. He'd done that plenty of times for work. No, this was different. This ticket represented something much bigger than just a comfortable 3-hour flight to Chicago. It represented hope. It represented the possibility that his life, and more importantly, his daughter Sophie's life, might finally be about to change for the better. The past few years had been rough. Really rough. When his wife left 3 years ago, David thought his world was ending. She'd walked out on a Tuesday morning, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter that said she needed to find herself and couldn't handle being a mother anymore. Sophie was only 5 then, and trying to explain to a kindergartner why mommy wasn't coming home was the hardest thing David had ever done. Since then, it had been just the two of them against the world. David worked as a junior architect at a small firm in Denver, making decent money but nothing spectacular. Every penny went toward rent, groceries, Sophie's school supplies, and the occasional treat like ice cream on Friday nights or a movie when they could afford it. Luxuries like first-class airline tickets, those were for other people. People who didn't have to choose between buying their daughter new shoes or fixing the car's broken air conditioning. But 3 months ago, everything started to shift. David's boss had noticed his talent for designing community centers and public spaces. The way David approached architecture wasn't just about making buildings look nice. He designed spaces that brought people together, that made families feel welcome, that turned cold structures into warm gathering places. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to need community support. Maybe it was because he knew how important it was for kids like Sophie to have safe, beautiful places to play and learn. Whatever the reason, his designs caught the attention of some important people. And now, here he was, about to fly to Chicago for an interview with Richardson and Associates, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the Midwest. The job would mean a 60% salary increase. It would mean Sophie could take those art classes she'd been wanting. It would mean they could move to a bigger apartment, maybe even one with a backyard where she could play. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom, interrupting David's thoughts. "We're now boarding first-class passengers and our premium members." David took a deep breath and walked toward the gate. This was it. He'd never been a first-class passenger before, but he'd decided to splurge on this ticket for 2 reasons. First, he wanted to arrive at the interview feeling rested and confident, not cramped and tired from being squeezed into a middle seat. Second, and maybe more importantly, he wanted to prove to himself that he deserved good things, that he wasn't just the guy who got left behind, the single dad barely scraping by. He was someone worthy of success, worthy of comfort, worthy of a better life. The flight attendant scanned his boarding pass with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Williams. Right this way to seat 2A. As David walked through the airplane's entrance, he couldn't help but grin. The first-class cabin was even nicer than he'd imagined. The seats were huge, covered in soft leather, and each one had enough legroom for someone twice his height. There were only 12 seats in the entire section, making it feel exclusive and peaceful. The lighting was warm and welcoming, and classical music played softly in the background. He found his seat and settled in, running his hands over the smooth armrests. The seat was so wide he could have fit Sophie next to him with room to spare. Speaking of Sophie, he pulled out his phone to text his mother, who was watching her for the weekend. "Just boarded. Flight takes off in 20 minutes. Give Sophie a hug for me." His mom replied immediately, "Will do, sweetheart. She's making you a good luck drawing for your interview. Something about a building with a rainbow on top. Fly safe." David smiled, feeling that familiar warmth in his chest that he got whenever he thought about his daughter. Sophie was the light of his life, the reason he worked so hard, the reason he got up every morning determined to make things better. At 8 years old, she was already showing signs of his creative spirit. Her bedroom walls were covered with drawings of elaborate castles, colorful houses, and fantastical buildings that seemed to float in the clouds. "She gets that from you," his mother always said, and maybe she was right. Even as a kid, David had been obsessed with buildings and spaces. He'd spend hours with his toy blocks, creating entire cities on the living room floor. His parents had encouraged his creativity, saving up to send him to architecture school where he'd thrived, graduating near the top of his class. But life after college hadn't gone exactly as planned. The recession hit just as he was starting his career, making jobs scarce. Then he'd met Catherine, Sophie's mother, and for a while everything seemed perfect. They'd gotten married, bought a small house, and when Sophie was born, David thought he had everything he'd ever wanted. Catherine's leaving had shattered that dream, but it had also taught David something important. He was stronger than he'd ever imagined. Over the past 3 years, he'd proven to himself that he could be both mother and father to Sophie, that he could build a good life for them, even when it felt impossible. The airplane began to fill with other passengers. David watched them walk past toward economy, remembering all the times he'd made that walk himself. Business travelers in wrinkled suits, families juggling carry-on bags and tired children, elderly couples holding hands as they navigated the narrow aisle. Each person had their own story, their own dreams and struggles. A flight attendant approached with a warm towel and a glass of orange juice. "Can I get you anything else before takeoff, Mr. Williams?" "No, thank you. This is perfect," and he meant it. Not just the towel or the juice, but this moment, this feeling of moving forward, of chasing something better. As the plane pushed back from the gate, David looked out the window at the Denver skyline, thinking about the presentation folder in his carry-on bag. Inside were his best designs, his vision for community-centered architecture, and his dreams for the future. Tomorrow morning, he'd walk into that interview room and show them what David Williams could do. He had no idea that in just a few hours his life would change in ways he never could have imagined. Not because of the job interview waiting for him in Chicago, but because of a simple act of kindness that would prove that sometimes the universe rewards those who choose to help others, even when they have every reason to focus only on themselves. 20 rows behind David's luxurious first-class seat, Lisa Chen was living through what felt like her worst nightmare. Her 6-month-old son Tyler had been crying for the past 15 minutes, and nothing she tried seemed to work. The sound echoed through the economy cabin, drawing frustrated looks and annoyed sighs from nearly every passenger around her. Lisa bounced Tyler gently in her arms, trying to stay calm even though her heart was racing with panic. She'd been awake since 3 in the morning when Tyler started running a fever. The pediatrician had said it was just a minor cold and that flying would be fine. But now, trapped in this metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground, Lisa wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "Shh, baby, please," she whispered into Tyler's ear, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "Mommy's here. Everything's okay," but Tyler wasn't buying it. His face was red and blotchy from crying, and his tiny fists waved in the air as if he were fighting off invisible demons. Lisa had tried everything in her limited arsenal of mom tricks. She'd fed him, changed his diaper twice, walked up and down the narrow aisle until the flight attendants asked her to sit down for safety reasons, and even attempted to nurse him, which only made him cry harder. The worst part wasn't even Tyler's crying. Though that was breaking her heart, the worst part was the way the other passengers were looking at her. The businessman in 23B kept checking his watch and shaking his head every time Tyler's cries got louder. The elderly woman across the aisle had put in earplugs and was shooting Lisa looks that could have frozen hell over. Behind her, she could hear a group of college students making comments about inconsiderate parents who shouldn't travel with babies. Lisa felt tears starting to build in her own eyes. This wasn't how this trip was supposed to go. She was flying to Chicago for her first day at a new job, a position she'd worked incredibly hard to get. After Tyler's father walked out when she was 5 months pregnant, Lisa had to completely rebuild her life. She'd finished her MBA while 7 months pregnant, studying between doctor's appointments and baby preparations. She'd interviewed for dozens of positions while dealing with morning sickness and swollen feet. When Henderson Airlines offered her the position as their new vice president of customer experience, it felt like a miracle. Not only was the salary more than she'd ever imagined making, but the company had a reputation for being family-friendly. They'd even offered to help her relocate and find good childcare in Chicago. But right now, surrounded by angry passengers and holding her inconsolable son, Lisa felt like the biggest failure in the world. She'd specifically chosen to fly economy today, even though her new position came with first-class travel benefits. She wanted to experience what regular customers went through, to understand their perspective before she started making decisions about customer service policies. It had seemed like such a smart, thoughtful approach to her new job. Now it just seemed stupid. "Ma'am, is there anything I can do to help?" Lisa looked up to see a flight attendant standing in the aisle. Her name tag read Kelly, and her smile seemed genuine, though Lisa could see the stress in her eyes too. "I don't know," Lisa said, bouncing Tyler harder. "He was sick last night, and I think his ears are bothering him from the altitude change." "I've tried everything. Have you tried a pacifier?" Kelly asked. "Sometimes the sucking motion helps with the ear pressure." Lisa's heart sank. "I had one, but I think I left it at security when I was going through the scanner. Everything was so chaotic, and I was juggling him and all our bags, and..." She trailed off, feeling like she might start crying herself. Kelly's expression softened. "Let me see what I can find in our supply closet. We sometimes have emergency baby supplies." As Kelly walked away, Lisa noticed that Tyler's crying had somehow gotten even louder. A man in the row in front of her turned around completely in his seat. "Look, lady, some of us are trying to work here," he said, his voice sharp with irritation. "Can't you do something about that kid?" "I'm trying," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm really trying." "Well, try harder," the man snapped before turning back around. That's when Lisa's own tears finally started falling. She felt so alone, so overwhelmed, so completely out of her depth. Here she was, about to start a job where she'd be responsible for improving customer experiences, and she couldn't even manage to keep her own baby calm on a simple flight. Tyler seemed to sense his mother's distress, and his cries became more desperate. Lisa wondered if other passengers could hear the exhaustion and defeat in her voice as she whispered to him, "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy's so sorry. I know you don't feel good. I know you want to go home." The truth was, Lisa wasn't even sure where home was anymore. She'd given up her apartment in Denver to take this job. All their belongings were in boxes, either on a moving truck headed to Chicago or packed into the 2 suitcases she'd checked. Tyler's favorite stuffed elephant was in one of those suitcases, along with most of his toys and comfort items. She'd kept only the essentials in her carry-on bag, and apparently, she'd failed to keep track of even those. Kelly returned with an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry, but we don't have any pacifiers on board. Is there anything else I can try?" Lisa shook her head, feeling defeated. "Thank you for trying." As Kelly walked away to help other passengers, Lisa looked down at Tyler's red, tear-streaked face. At 6 months old, he was usually such a happy baby. He loved to smile and babble, and he'd just started sitting up on his own. But today, he looked as miserable as Lisa felt. The businessman in 23B was making increasingly dramatic sighs, and Lisa could hear other passengers starting to grumble more loudly. Someone behind her muttered something about people who shouldn't travel with babies if they can't control them. Lisa closed her eyes and tried to block out the criticism. She thought about all the parenting books she'd read, all the advice she'd gotten from other mothers, all the confidence she'd felt just yesterday when Tyler had been his normal, happy self. None of that seemed to matter now. She wondered what the other passengers would think if they knew she was about to become one of the people responsible for their flying experience. Would they laugh? Would they think Henderson Airlines was making a mistake hiring someone who couldn't even handle one crying baby? Tyler's cries reached a new level of intensity, and Lisa felt her own panic rising to match it. She had no idea how much longer this flight would last, but she wasn't sure she could survive another hour of this. More importantly, she wasn't sure Tyler could either. Looking around the cabin at all the frustrated faces, Lisa realized that she had never felt more alone in her life. She was just one overwhelmed mother, trying her best in an impossible situation, with no idea that help was about to come from the most unexpected place. David was halfway through reading an article about sustainable architecture when he heard it. The sound was faint at first, barely audible over the gentle hum of the airplane engines and the quiet conversations of his fellow first-class passengers. But as it grew louder and more desperate, David's attention shifted completely away from his magazine. It was the unmistakable sound of a baby crying. Not just fussing or complaining, but the kind of deep, heartbroken wailing that every parent knows means something is really wrong. David set down his magazine and listened more carefully. The crying was coming from somewhere behind the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the plane. Even through the barrier, he could hear the distress in those tiny cries, and something deep in his chest tightened with recognition. He knew that sound. He knew it intimately. 3 years ago, when Sophie was going through her colicky phase, David had heard those exact same desperate cries night after night. He remembered walking the floors of their small apartment at 2 in the morning, bouncing Sophie gently while she screamed inconsolably. He remembered the feeling of helplessness, the exhaustion, the overwhelming sense that he was failing as a parent because he couldn't make his child feel better. But more than that, he remembered how alone he'd felt during those moments. Catherine had already started pulling away by then, leaving David to handle most of the nighttime crying sessions by himself. He'd felt like the whole world was sleeping peacefully while he stood in his living room, holding his screaming daughter and wondering if he was cut out for this parenting thing. The crying from economy got louder, and David could hear other sounds now too. Adult voices, though he couldn't make out the words. They didn't sound supportive or understanding. They sounded annoyed, impatient, maybe even angry. David's jaw tightened. He knew those sounds too. The judgment of strangers who had never been in that impossible situation. The people who assumed that crying babies meant bad parents. Who had no idea what it felt like to be doing your absolute best and still feeling like you were failing. Without really thinking about it, David unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. The flight attendant who had been so welcoming earlier, he thought her name was Kelly, was walking past with a concerned expression on her face. "Excuse me," David said quietly. "That baby that's crying, is everything okay back there?" Kelly paused, glancing toward the economy section. "There's a mother traveling alone with her infant. The little one has been upset for quite a while now. She's doing her best, but—" Kelly trailed off diplomatically. "Would it be okay if I went back to see if I could help?" David asked. Kelly looked surprised. "Of course, but sir, you don't need to leave your seat. We can handle the situation." David shook his head. "I'm a father. I've been where that mom is right now. Sometimes it just helps to know someone understands." Kelly's expression softened. "Seat 27B, the aisle seat." David made his way through the curtain and into the economy cabin. The difference was immediately obvious. The seats were smaller, packed closer together, and the lighting was harsher. But what struck him most was the atmosphere. The first-class cabin had been peaceful, almost library-like in its quiet elegance. Back here, tension filled the air like smoke. He quickly spotted the source of the distress. A young woman sat in an aisle seat, holding a red-faced baby who was crying with the kind of intensity that suggested he'd been at it for a while. The woman's own face was streaked with tears, and David could see the exhaustion and defeat in every line of her body. Around her, passengers were making their displeasure known in that particularly cruel way that people do when they're inconvenienced by someone else's struggle. Eye rolls, heavy sighs, pointed conversations about inconsiderate travelers. David felt his protective instincts kick in, the same ones that made him want to shield Sophie from anyone who might hurt her. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle the already overwhelmed mother. "Excuse me," he said gently, crouching down beside her seat so he was at eye level. "I'm David. I couldn't help but notice you might need some support." The woman looked up at him with red, exhausted eyes. "I'm Lisa," she said, her voice barely audible over her son's cries. "I'm so sorry about the noise. Tyler's been sick, and I think the altitude is bothering his ears, and I've tried everything I can think of, but nothing's working." David felt his heart clench with recognition and sympathy. "How old is he?" 6 months, Lisa said, bouncing Tyler gently. "He's usually such a good baby, but he had a fever last night, and I think I made a mistake bringing him on this flight today." "You didn't make a mistake," David said firmly. "Sometimes babies cry, and sometimes there's nothing we can do about it except get through it. Trust me, I've been exactly where you are." Lisa looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You have kids?" "A daughter. She's 8 now, but I remember those early days very clearly." David glanced around at the hostile faces surrounding them. "Listen, I have an idea, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." "Okay," Lisa said hesitantly. "I'm sitting in first class, seat 2A. It's much quieter up there, more space, more comfortable. I think you and Tyler might have a better chance of settling down if you weren't surrounded by—" David gestured diplomatically at the increasingly agitated passengers around them. "Well, if you had more room to breathe?" Lisa's eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. Those tickets are so expensive, and you paid for that seat, and And I'm offering it to you, David said simply. I've been a single parent for 3 years. I know what it feels like to feel like the whole world is judging you when you're already doing everything you can. Nobody should have to go through that alone. But where would you sit? Lisa asked, still looking stunned. David glanced at the middle seat next to her, currently empty but surrounded by the very passengers who had been making Lisa's life miserable for the past 20 minutes. Right here looks fine to me. Lisa started shaking her head before he even finished speaking. I can't let you do that. You don't even know me. Why would you give up your first-class seat for a complete stranger? David thought about Sophie, about all the times strangers had shown them kindness when they needed it most. The elderly woman at the grocery store who had entertained Sophie while David dealt with a screaming toddler meltdown in the cereal aisle. The teacher who had stayed late to help Sophie with a project when David was stuck at work. The countless small acts of human decency that had made their life bearable during the hardest times. Because someone would have done it for my daughter, he said. Because parents need to look out for each other. And because that little guy deserves to be comfortable. And you deserve to not feel like everyone hates you for something that isn't your fault. Tyler's cries had actually gotten a little quieter during their conversation, as if he could sense the kindness in David's voice. Lisa looked down at her son, then back at David, then around at the hostile faces surrounding them. Are you absolutely sure? She asked. I'm absolutely sure, David said. Come on, let's get you both settled somewhere more peaceful. What happened next was something David would remember for the rest of his life. As he helped Lisa gather her diaper bag, her purse, and Tyler's few belongings, he noticed the other passengers watching in amazement. The businessman who had been so rude earlier was staring open-mouthed. The college students behind them had gone completely silent. David carried Lisa's bags while she held Tyler, leading them through the curtain into first class. The contrast was immediate. Tyler's cries seemed less piercing in the larger space, and Lisa's shoulders visibly relaxed as they moved away from the hostile environment. This is seat 2A, David said, gesturing to his former seat. It's got plenty of room, it's quiet, and the flight attendants up here are wonderful. If you need anything at all, just ask. As Lisa settled into the luxurious seat with Tyler, David could already see the difference. The baby's cries were becoming less frantic, and Lisa looked like she could finally breathe again. I don't know how to thank you, Lisa said. Tears in her eyes again, but these were different tears. You don't need to thank me, David said. Just take care of that little guy. As David made his way back to economy, he had no idea that his simple act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. The change was almost magical. Within minutes of settling into David's first-class seat, Tyler's desperate crying began to soften into quieter whimpers, and then, miraculously, into the kind of fussy sounds that actually seemed manageable. Lisa couldn't believe the difference the environment was making. The seat was enormous compared to what she'd been sitting in. Tyler had room to move around without bumping into armrests or seat backs, and Lisa could actually extend her arms fully to rock him without hitting other passengers. The lighting was softer, the air felt less stuffy, and most importantly, there were no angry faces staring at them. No hostile energy making both mother and baby feel like unwanted intruders. Oh my goodness, Lisa whispered to Tyler as his cries finally stopped completely. Look at you, sweet boy. You just needed some space to breathe, didn't you? Tyler looked up at his mother with those big, tired eyes that had been streaming tears just minutes before. His face was still blotchy from crying, but he seemed calmer now, more like himself. Lisa felt her own heart rate finally starting to slow down. Kelly, the flight attendant who had tried to help earlier, approached with a warm smile and a fresh bottle of water. How are we doing over here? Kelly asked quietly. I have to say that was one of the kindest things I've ever seen on a flight. Lisa shifted Tyler to one arm and accepted the water gratefully. I still can't believe he did that. I mean, who gives up a first-class seat to a complete stranger? Someone very special, Kelly said. In 15 years of working for Henderson Airlines, I've seen a lot of passengers, and that man is definitely one of the good ones. Lisa looked up sharply. Did you say Henderson Airlines? Kelly nodded. Yes, that's who I work for. Why do you know the company? Lisa felt her heart start racing again, but for an entirely different reason than before. She looked around the cabin, really taking in the details for the first time since she'd sat down. The Henderson Airlines logo was stitched into the headrest covers. The safety card in the seat pocket bore the familiar blue and gold company colors she'd been studying for weeks as she prepared for her new position. This was her airline, her new company. And she was sitting in first class because a passenger, one of her passengers, had given up his seat to help her and Tyler. "Oh my," Lisa said quietly, her mind starting to race with the implications. Kelly was still standing there, looking slightly confused by Lisa's reaction. "Is everything all right?" Lisa looked down at Tyler, who had finally fallen asleep against her chest, then back up at Kelly. She made a quick decision. "Kelly, I need to tell you something. And I need you to keep it confidential for now, okay?" Kelly looked intrigued but nodded. "Of course. My name is Lisa Chen, and tomorrow is my first day as Henderson Airlines' new Vice President of Customer Experience." Kelly's eyes went wide. You're the new VP? But I thought you were traveling to Chicago for business. I mean, I assumed you were just a regular passenger." "I am a regular passenger today," Lisa said. "That was the whole point. I specifically booked an economy ticket because I wanted to experience what our customers experience. I wanted to understand their perspective before I started making decisions about customer service policies." Kelly stared at her in amazement. "So you were traveling incognito on your own airline?" "Exactly. And I have to tell you, Kelly, what I experienced back in economy before that man helped us, it wasn't good. The passengers were hostile, the environment was stressful, and I felt completely unsupported. If I hadn't been who I am, if I'd just been a regular mother traveling with a sick baby, I would have had a terrible experience with this airline." Kelly looked concerned. "I'm so sorry about that. We try to help when we can, but sometimes with a full flight and safety regulations." Lisa held up a hand. "You were wonderful, Kelly. You did everything you could. The problem isn't with the flight attendants. The problem is with the system, with the environment we create, with the way we handle situations like this." As Tyler slept peacefully in her arms, Lisa's mind was working fast. She thought about all the customer experience theories she'd studied, all the policies she'd been hired to improve, all the changes she'd been planning to implement. But none of her academic knowledge had prepared her for the reality of what she'd just experienced. "Kelly, tell me about the man who gave up his seat." "David, I think he said his name was." Kelly glanced toward the economy section. "He seems lovely. Very kind, very genuine. He said he was a single father and that he'd been in your situation before." "A single father," Lisa repeated thoughtfully. She looked down at Tyler, thinking about how hard it had been to travel alone with him for just a few hours. She couldn't imagine doing this regularly, handling all the challenges of parenthood without a partner to share the load. "What else did he say?" Lisa asked. "Not much. He asked if he could help, and when I told him about the situation, he immediately wanted to come back and see what he could do. He didn't hesitate for a second." Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes again, but these were completely different from the tears of frustration and exhaustion she'd been crying earlier. These were tears of gratitude and something else, a deep recognition of what she'd just witnessed. "Kelly, I need to ask you to do something for me, and it's going to sound strange. Anything," Kelly said. "I need you to find out everything you can about David without being obvious about it. Where he's traveling to, what he does for work, if he mentions anything about his daughter or his life. Can you do that?" Kelly looked puzzled but nodded. "I can try. May I ask why?" Lisa looked around the first-class cabin, then back toward the economy section where David was now sitting in what had been her middle seat, probably surrounded by some of the same passengers who had been so cruel to her earlier. "Because what that man did for us wasn't just kind. It was extraordinary. And I think Henderson Airlines needs to know about extraordinary passengers like him." But even as she said it, Lisa knew it was more than that. What David had done, he had touched something deep inside her, something that went beyond corporate policies and customer service initiatives. He had seen her at her lowest moment and had chosen to help, not because he had to, not because it benefited him in any way, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As the VP of Customer Experience, Lisa had been hired to improve how Henderson Airlines treated its passengers. But David had just shown her what real customer care looked like. It wasn't about policies or procedures or corporate initiatives. It was about human beings taking care of each other, about recognizing that sometimes people need help and choosing to provide it without expecting anything in return. "There's something else, Kelly," Lisa said quietly. "I don't want David to know who I am. Not yet. When you talk to him, just be natural. Don't mention our conversation." Kelly nodded, though she still looked confused. "Okay, but can I ask what you're planning?" Lisa looked down at Tyler, who was sleeping so peacefully now that it was hard to believe he'd been screaming just an hour ago. Then she looked around the first-class cabin that David had given up for them, thinking about the sacrifice he'd made without knowing who she was or what it might mean. "I'm planning to make sure that kindness like his doesn't go unnoticed," Lisa said. "David changed our day, Kelly. Now I think it's time for us to change his." As the plane continued its journey toward Chicago, Lisa began to formulate a plan. She had no idea yet what David's story was, what challenges he might be facing, or what dreams he might be pursuing. But she was going to find out. And when she did, she was going to make sure that his act of selfless kindness was rewarded in ways he never could have imagined. Because that's what extraordinary people deserve, an extraordinary recognition for their extraordinary hearts. The rest of the flight passed peacefully. Tyler slept soundly in Lisa's arms while she watched David through the gap in the curtain, still amazed by what he had done. True to her word, Kelly had struck up casual conversations with David, learning small details about his life that painted a picture of a man who deserved far more recognition than he was getting. David Williams, architect from Denver. Flying to Chicago for a job interview with Richardson and Associates, single father to an 8-year-old daughter named Sophie. Kelly had even managed to see some of David's architectural drawings when he pulled them out to review before landing, and she'd been impressed by the creativity and heart that went into his designs. "He specializes in community spaces," Kelly had whispered to Lisa during one of her trips between cabins. "Libraries, community centers, places that bring families together. He showed me a drawing his daughter made of one of his buildings. Apparently she draws rainbows on all his designs because she says they make buildings happy." Lisa felt her heart clench with emotion. Not only had David given up his seat to help her, but he was clearly a devoted father trying to build a better life for his daughter. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on her. Here they both were, single parents doing everything they could to create good lives for their children. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, Lisa made her decision. She was going to tell David who she was, and she was going to make sure his kindness was rewarded in a way that would change his life. After landing, Lisa waited until most of the passengers had deplaned before making her move. She gathered Tyler and their belongings and made her way to the economy section, where David was pulling his carry-on bag from the overhead compartment. "David?" she called softly. He turned and smiled when he saw her. Tyler was awake now, looking much more like himself, babbling happily in his mother's arms. "How did our little guy do for the rest of the flight?" David asked, reaching out to gently touch Tyler's hand. Tyler immediately grabbed his finger and held on tight. "He was perfect," Lisa said. "He slept the whole time. I can't thank you enough for what you did. You saved our entire day." David waved off her gratitude. "I'm just glad he's feeling better. That's all that matters." Lisa took a deep breath. "David, I need to tell you something. Can we walk together for a minute?" They made their way off the plane and into the terminal, Tyler contentedly looking around at all the new sights and sounds. Other passengers hurried past them, everyone eager to get to their destinations, but Lisa and David walked slowly. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable," Lisa began, "but I need you to know that what you did today was more significant than you realize." David looked confused but curious. "Okay. My full name is Lisa Chen, and starting tomorrow, I'm Henderson Airline's new Vice President of Customer Experience." David stopped walking completely. "You're what?" "I was traveling incognito today," Lisa explained. "I wanted to experience what regular customers experience before I started making decisions about customer service policies. I had no idea when I booked that economy ticket that I was going to have one of the most difficult travel experiences of my life." David stared at her in amazement. "You work for the airline?" "You're an executive." "I am. And David, what happened today showed me something incredibly important about what's wrong with our customer service, and more importantly, what's right with the kind of people who choose to fly with us." Lisa shifted Tyler to one arm and pulled out her phone. "Kelly told me you're here for a job interview." "Architecture, right?" David nodded, still looking stunned. "With Richardson and Associates." It's a really big opportunity for me and my daughter. Tell me about Sophie, Lisa said gently. David's face immediately lit up. She's 8 years old and she's the most amazing kid you could ever meet. Smart, creative, funny. She draws these incredible pictures of buildings and always adds rainbows to them, because she says buildings should make people happy. Lisa smiled. That's beautiful. And this job you're interviewing for? What would it mean for you two? Everything, David said simply. The salary would let us move to a bigger place, maybe somewhere with a yard where she can play. She could take those art classes she's been wanting. I could finally feel like I'm providing the kind of life she deserves. Lisa looked at Tyler, then back at David. What if I told you there might be another opportunity? Something that could offer you all of that and more? David looked puzzled. I don't understand. Henderson Airlines has been looking for someone to head up our new corporate social responsibility division. We want to build partnerships with communities, create programs that support families, design spaces in our airports that actually serve the people who use them. We need someone who understands what real customer care looks like, someone who knows how to put people first. David's eyes widened. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an interview, Lisa said. But David, after what you did today, after seeing the kind of person you are, I think you might be exactly what we're looking for. Someone who doesn't just talk about putting customers first, but who actually does it, even when it costs them something. David stood there in the middle of the busy terminal, looking like he couldn't quite process what was happening. But you don't even know me. You don't know anything about my work or my qualifications or... I know everything I need to know, Lisa interrupted. I know that when you heard a baby crying, your first instinct was to help. I know that when you saw a mother in distress, you didn't think twice about giving up something valuable to make her situation better. I know that you're raising a daughter who thinks buildings should be happy, and that kind of perspective is exactly what we need in our company. Lisa pulled out a business card and handed it to David. The salary would be significantly more than what Richardson is offering. We provide excellent benefits, including childcare assistance and family travel privileges. And the position is based right here in Chicago, so you wouldn't have to worry about relocating Sophie. David looked down at the business card, then back at Lisa and Tyler. This is really happening. This isn't some kind of joke. It's really happening, Lisa confirmed. David, you changed our day today. You turned what could have been the worst flight of my life into a reminder of how good people can be. Now I want to change yours. I don't know what to say, David said, his voice thick with emotion. Say you'll think about it, Lisa said. My assistant will call you tomorrow to set up a formal interview. And David, bring some of Sophie's drawings with you. I have a feeling our passengers would love to see buildings with rainbows on them. 2 weeks later, David Williams started his new position as Henderson Airlines Director of Corporate Social Responsibility. His first initiative was a program to provide comfort items for traveling families, including a partnership with children's hospitals to donate toys and books to young passengers. But the real reward came on their first flight together to Disneyland, a celebration trip courtesy of the airline. As Sophie pressed her face against the airplane window watching the clouds pass by below, she turned to her father with a huge grin. Daddy, look, we're flying through my rainbows. David smiled, thinking about how a single act of kindness had changed everything. Sometimes he realized the best things in life come not from what we gain, but from what we're willing to give away.